So I want to tell you a little bit about Brad. He's best known as Brad the Pianist on Fox TV's Glee. He's also appeared as Brad the Pianist on Gilmore Girls and has numerous other TV appearances, including the Glee Project, for which he actually spoke. For the 2009 Academy Awards with Hugh Jackman and Hathaway, he collaborated with them on the opening number, received an Emmy certificate for his work. He's worked on several films and musicals, including Chicago, The Lovely, Beauty and the Beast. He's conducted and performed in over 6,000 performances of more than 400 different musicals in New York and LA, internationally.
Several of them good.
Several. He's orchestrated for the LA Phil, Hollywood Bowl, and Philadelphia orchestras, made music with Billy Joel, Rod Stewart, Scarlett Johansson, Jason Alexander, Brent Spiner, John Lithgow, Patti LuPone, Angela Lansbury, Kristen Chenoweth, to name a few. He's written music for off-Broadway shows that have had hundreds of individual productions, including Tin Pan Alley Rag, which is an off-Broadway hit about 10 years ago. He's been leader on about 35 albums for RCA, DRW, Perez, Saraband, and he has been working in the last few years with Matthew Morrison, with him on tour, and with symphony orchestras. In 2016, he was the music director for the Rocky Horror Picture Show on Fox TV. So once again, please welcome Brad. You and I have talked about doing a songwriting exercise, because most of the folks here, although not all, most of them are in my Making a Musical class. And we're just at a point now, we've done a little bit of scene writing, we've done...
My wife's back there and I'm getting on-camera notes.
Oh, so we're at a point now where we've done some lyric writing and some scene writing, and we're just at a point where we're taking lyrics that members of the class have written and then figuring out how to write songs to them. And we have ranges of experience in the class, going from no experience at all to some pretty experienced composers. And so at relatively soon, Brad has agreed to take a look at some of those lyrics and talk about how he would approach this. And we have a piano handy in case. Yeah, I'll leave it unlocked before.
Yeah, but yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Exactly. But before that, I had a few questions, and then after that, I've asked them to come up with some questions too. So this class is writing new musicals. They're doing it two different ways. They're doing it through adaptation, and they're doing it through creating original ideas. So I just wondered if you had any general thoughts about the processes that you have used or been part of when you've been working on new musicals, and what...
Vis-a-vis adaptation.
Adaptation or original musicals, just ways that you've approached those tasks that have been productive or not productive, if they're illustrative.
When I first got interested in musical theater, almost all of the great classic shows that I knew of were adaptations, often where the needle was set very close to the original work. Two that immediately came to mind because I loved them so much as a kid and still do, is My Fair Lady and Carousel. My Fair Lady, you can find unrhymed versions of some of the lyrics in the original Pygmalion by George Bernard Shaw. It's an incredibly close adaptation, with the exception of the last moment, which is to this day controversial because there's a new revival where they switched it up again.
Right.
You know, in the era of Me Too, should she go back to Higgins? You know?
Right.
Who basically is a gay old man. Carousel, I came to find out, was in many ways a very liberal adaptation of its source material, moving it from Hungary to
Coast of Maine.
the coast of Maine, where you're shucking oysters all the time, and changing its date by a few decades, so it don't matter, it's back then anyway, by the way. Including a celestial ending that is not in the original play at all, that Hammerstein was fond of saying, Molnar, the playwright of Lilium, cried when he saw it. He doesn't specify the reason he was crying. And original Broadway books, those that weren't based on a specific identifiable earlier property, were fewer and farther between. Bye Bye Birdie was more, is original. It's based instead on sort of the newspaper. It's based on Elvis Presley goes into the army.
Right.
How do you make that a musical? And in a way, that makes it a throwback to shows before Oklahoma, or especially Showboat, that often, if they were very American shows, they were just kitchen sink. They were, I've got a couple of funny songs here, you make up some stupid plot for the romantic leads, somebody, you know, the people who are playing the comic foils who might have already written their own material, they're a comedy team from vaudeville. Just absolute mess.
By the way, there for Monday, they are looking at Green Grow the Lilacs, the first scene, and Oklahoma, the first scene, and actually comparing word for word to see what's changed, what's.
I wish I'd be here for that.
Yeah. I can send you what their homework.
I worked with a country singer who had this grand estate in Santa Fe, and they put me up in this second property that they owned, which is where Green Grow the Lilacs, where Lynn Riggs wrote Green Grow the Lilacs. Now there's probably 17 places claiming to be that, but this is one of the places claiming to be where he wrote Green Grow the Lilacs. Not, interestingly enough, not in Oklahoma.
So what about the shows you've been involved with?
Sometimes when things are not an adaptation, they are a little bit more like Bye Bye Birdie. They're a pastiche.
How do you define pastiche? We haven't actually used that term.
No, I have no idea what it means. Well, a good case might be, a funny thing happened in the Way to the Forum. Is on the title page it says it's based on the plays of Plautus. And pretty much every situation in there you can find in some form somewhere in Plautus. But pretty much any situation that's common you can find in Plautus. So, you know, is it really based on this and that Plautus play, or is it just Gelbart loves this stuff and goes, I can knit more of this and it's funny? You know, the comedy is based on something it was never based on in Plautus. The comedy is based on, hey, they're all ancient Greek, which was not particularly funny to the ancient Greeks.
Right.
I worked on a show, just as a musician, called Forever Plaid, which is a pastiche of cliches about clean-cut boys in the 50s, probably closet gay, but it's not based on any property, and it has a book to it, but it really doesn't need it. It's literally, the replacement for the book is style. It's 4 male voice singing groups from the late 50s, early 60s that get shot down by the Beatles, basically. The idea is that that era came to a crashing end suddenly when you hear these kids screaming, I want to hold your hand, and everyone goes crazy for that, and these groups just sort of petered out and went away. And that's the milieu that that's set in, only to add to it, they don't know it, but they're dead. They're in a car that's been hit by a bus of nuns and school children going to see the first appearance of the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. You know, obviously less important as a plot than a metaphor.
Right.
The pastiche show that I did that can apply here. It was called originally it was called The Remarkable Ruth Fields, but when it ran off Broadway, it was called The Truth About Ruth. And the truth about Ruth is that within the play is she's a woman, an entertainer, a vaudeville performer, and she has a full beard. The truth is she is a full beard. The truth is it's a man playing a woman, and he has a full beard. Although when we ran it off Broadway, we actually found a woman who wore a great beard. I always thought it was a mistake. I was right, we weren't a hit, you haven't heard of the show. But we just throw everything in that we can. The impetus is, I got to play piano for a while. I wasn't her music director, I was a teenager, for a woman named Ema Sumac. Anyone ever hear of Ema Sumac? You have heard of Ema Sumac? I think we're above a certain line of age than almost everyone else, so that might. Ema Sumac, just this amazing story. She was Peruvian, had her sort of historic claim to fame is theoretically she had a singing range that went from the bottom to the top of the piano. So she was packaged as this exotic singer, and she'd sing, only it would keep going up until it like ran off the end of the piano. And it was a pop song, and it had conga drums, and you know, just Hollywood America's idea of what exotic Peruvians might be. And the publicity went out that she was an Incan princess, even though the Incans have not existed as an ethnic group for 800 years.
Right.
Well, by the time I got to work with her, her career had ups and downs. She'd been in a few Hollywood movies. She never took off. Not really. She was always a cult figure with incredibly religious cult fans. They would come to nightclubs and watch her perform, and if a waiter came over, they're like, shh! And they were like intent, you know. But now, she was in her 60s. Her husband had absconded with all of the money and disappeared. So she had to go out and perform again. She did these appearances on David Letterman. He was a talk show host before O'Brien, and where she would sort of be the butt of his jokes, but you sort of thought she was in on it, but you weren't sure.
Right.
Well, I got to meet her and work with her, and I'm not sure. I think her English was still very poor, and she'd have memorized jokes that she would say in her show, but still kind of be surprised that, oh, that's the laugh line. Oh, they're after. Okay.
So this was the inspiration for the...
This was for the character. Instead of being Peruvian, we decided she'd have a beard. Changed up the story that way. But our version, she's called against the house. She starts out as a circus performer, you know, because she's got the beard. She goes into vaudeville. She meets a soldier who falls in love with her, doesn't even care about the beard or see the beard. She gets called against the house. He goes off to war and dies. She's called up to testify at the House Un-American Activities Committee because another man who seemed to be interested in her was really just using her to convey secrets, spy stuff. She survives rock and roll. Turns out the soldier wasn't actually killed. He was just missing in action for 30 years. He comes back, still in love with her. They end up happily together. It's just a way of hitting a bunch of American history all into one thing as seen through the eyes of Ima Sumac, who, by the way, people were convinced was really Amy Camus, which is Ima Sumac spelled backwards, from Brooklyn. But the favorite is she had 17 tours, each labeled her farewell tour. And she had, and she had a great line about it. And she said, "Oh, you know," they say, "Miss Sumac, I understand you're Incan royalty." She goes like, "I don't know where that rumor starts. It's true I'm Incan. And I am descended from royalty, but I never tell people." Right? And then it's like, well, you know, are you Amy Camus from Brooklyn? And she say, I don't know what that means. What's the other big fall for life? That's true. Oh, she said, and it's like, is it true that you're retiring? She says, this is how that started. I was having a press conference just like this. And I said, well, bye, I'm retiring. I went up to my room. Also, she still had all the range, but no power whatsoever, which is okay because she had a body mic. But sadly, she loved very low-cut gowns and wanted the body mic clipped. There was no other place to clip it. So every time she turned, the sound would disappear for a second and then come back for a second. Boo, 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 boo. Very hard to play for. And my favorite moment, really a career-breaking moment for me, is she had a music director who was just an absolute depressive. He would sit down, lie down in rehearsal, and he had this little gun that had crystals in it that's supposed to, of course, put energy into him somehow. And he'd say, play it again, it's fine, play it again. And she would joke about it on stage, not much of a joke. She'd say, this would be the joke, it'd be like, if I had a gun, I would kill him. That's the joke. And then she'd come afterwards and say, he's terrible. All music directors are terrible. Never had a good one. Want to be my new music director? First career opportunity I turned down. It's like, well, but you put it like that. So yeah, so that's the very long answer to pastiche.
So you're going to take on the role of being a composer for one of these folks as lyricist.
Excited.
What is that dynamic been in your experience between, or either observing between lyricists and composers, or being a composer or lyricist for others?
There's an interesting dynamic. You've got, let's just use 4 examples. You've got Rodgers and Hart, Rodgers and Hammerstein, Cole Porter, Stephen Sondheim. Rodgers almost always wrote the melody first when working with Larry Hart. Hammerstein almost always wrote the lyrics first when working with Rodgers. Cole Porter absolutely writes like a man who is writing at the same time. He'll have, we're talking about, he'll have like what would be an A, B, A, C form, but sometimes the C is the lyric, a rewrite of the lyric of the first A, but now with completely new music. Just something that you wouldn't think of if you were writing the lyric first.
Right,
You know? Sondheim writes both, but it does sound like it could have been 2 separate people. There's very little invasiveness to the mathematical forms of the composer imposed on by the lyricist, you know? Even to the point of, he's more careful than Larry Hart, who was very careful about making sure the exact pickups and stands match. You'll never find what are supposed to be matching phrases, and this one is 2 pickups, 2/8 notes, this one is 1/8 note before. The composer is extremely respectful of the lyricist, and the lyricist is extremely respectful of the composer. For Cole Porter, it's like, I can mess up both of these because I am both of them.
Right.
Most of my experience, more often than not, has been driven in the Hammerstein mold, lyrics first. I get the lyric, I analyze the lyric. 2 very important steps. One is, often the tune comes to you right away. You're going, oh, well, this has got to be the style it has to have. This makes sense for the character. The character's lying about something, so the music will tell the truth, or the music will reinforce the lie. You pick which it is, and then the rhythm of the lyric makes sense to you, so you kind of got a first draft. Well, you know, your lyricist is having tea. Then, and this is a really important step, then you say, because they just spent 5 days slavering over every word, slaving, to try and get it right. You have to say, this is going to be really difficult. Can you come back in a couple of days, and I'll see if I can have a draft for you. If they bring it to you, they just got it off their printer after days of work, and they have their tea, and you come back and say, I think I got it, you're just a jerk at that point. You're just an absolute jerk. Because all of the work you do to be a good composer, you've been doing all your life.
Right.
Lyricists still have to do a whole lot of hard work on that specific song in that specific moment. Composing seldom is that for him.
I mean, Richard Rodgers used to walk off and then come back in 20 minutes with a song.
Right. And Hammerstein hated that and would write about that. And Hammerstein, by the way, would bring his own tunes in, which in musical stages Rodgers refers to as just terrible, just terrible. You know. Yeah.
Well, so here is their prompt, and here are a couple of lyrics. And while you look at that, I'm going to get whichever lyric you choose, I will project so people can see it. So while you're looking at your lyrics, I'm going to get the projector going because
you will project
that. And actually, now that you'll have the hard copy, so you don't need.